Before we continue with the rest of the video, we could use your help. Click that like button to help spread the word about watchJojo, and also be sure to subscribe and click the notification bell so you don't miss our future videos. Deep secrets of Martin Luther King Jr.'s life. We all know who Martin Luther King Jr. is and what he did in history. He was a civil rights activist during the 1950s and 1960s who led nonviolent protests to end racial inequality. Martin Luther King Jr. is known as one of the most great orators of the 20th century, and his speeches still inspire many people to this present day. In the next few minutes, we'll explore more deep facts about Martin Luther King Jr. and his life. Martin Luther King Jr. was the most important activist and leader in the civil rights movement. The reverse of the $5 bill will have images from King's "I Have a Dream" speech and the concert of opera singer Marian Anderson before 2020, as announced by the Treasury Secretary in 2016. He suffered from depression most of his life. There's celebrations every year on Martin Luther King Day in Toronto, Canada and Hiroshima, Japan. He's the only American citizen, non-president in the US to have a national holiday in his honor. He supported the removal of the faculty-led prayer in public schools. Until 2000, all 50 states of the US did not recognize Martin Luther King Jr. Day as a paid holiday. Martin Luther King Jr. was awarded at least 50 honorary degrees from colleges and universities in a rare, unique condition. He was born on January 15, 1929, and his name is Michael King Jr. in Atlanta, Georgia. He changed his name from Michael King Jr.'s name when MLK was 5 years old to Martin Luther after German Protestant leader Martin Luther. His father was Michael King, who was a pastor of Ebenezer Baptist Church. He entered college at the age of 15 in 1944. He skipped grades 9 and 12. Martin Luther King Jr. received a bachelor's degree in sociology from Morehouse College, divinity degree from Crozier Theological Seminary, and a PhD in theology from Boston University in 1955. Martin Luther King Jr. married Miss Coretta Scott in 1953. King Jr. had 4 children: Yolanda, Martin Luther King III, Dexter, and Bernice. King Jr. became a pastor at Dexter Avenue Baptist Church in Montgomery, Alabama. He was a member of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, or NAACP, for many years. He took the leadership of the Montgomery bus boycott in 1955, where Rosa Parks was arrested for not giving up her seat to a white woman and moving to the back of the bus. The Montgomery bus boycott lasted for a year until a judgment came from the Supreme Court declaring that segregation on buses was unconstitutional on November 13th. Martin Luther King Jr. and other civil rights activists founded the Southern Christian Leadership Conference in 1957 to organize and conduct nonviolent protests for civil rights. The new founded organization used the name Christian Leadership in their title instead of Negroes and Colored People. It meant that its goals are not just those of one race, but of Christian people. Martin King Jr., along with other activists, led many nonviolent protests for civil rights around the country. He spoke and participated over 2,500 times at public events and traveled over 6 million miles. Martin Luther King Jr. wrote about 5 books and many uncounted articles to spread his message. During his protests at Birmingham, Alabama, Martin Luther King Jr. was arrested. He penned a letter from the Birmingham jail, which later became a manifesto for civil rights revolution. Martin King Jr. traveled to India in February 1959 to study Mahatma Gandhi's principles of nonviolence to complete his message. Martin King Jr. adopted Gandhi's principles of peaceful resistance to fight against racial discrimination. Martin Luther King Jr. led a freedom walk in Detroit, Michigan on June 23rd. Nearly 125,000 people took part in the walk. Martin King Jr. on a historic walk in Washington, D.C. for racial equality, protection from police abuse, freedom, end of discrimination, and jobs, delivered the "I Have a Dream" speech on August 28th. In 1964, President Johnson passed the Civil Rights Act prohibiting all racial discrimination after the historic speech given by Martin Luther King Jr. Martin Luther King Jr. received Nobel Peace Prize at the age of 35 to become the youngest person to have this prize until Malala, who won it at the age of 17. He won the Nobel Peace Prize for fighting racial discrimination through nonviolence on October 14th. He announces the Poor People Campaign, which its main agenda was being freedom and jobs for all people of all races, on November 27, 1967. Martin Luther King Jr. protested against the Vietnam War. He was assassinated on the balcony of the Lorraine Motel in Memphis, Tennessee on April 4, 1968. President Ronald Reagan signed a bill on November 2, 1983, declaring a national holiday for Martin Luther King Jr. He was the first African American to be granted a national holiday. He already tried to commit suicide at the age of 12 when he learned that his grandmother died. The bullet that killed King Jr. entered through his right cheek, breaking his jaw, then traveled down his spinal cord before lodging in his shoulder. Nearly 3 hours of surgery was performed on Martin Luther King Jr. to remove a steel letter opener from his chest in 1958. Martin Luther King Jr. donated all of the $54,123 he received from his Nobel Peace Prize to the civil rights movement. Martin Luther King Jr. National Day is celebrated on the third Monday of January. The last state to declare Martin Luther King Jr. a holiday was Utah. Martin Luther King Jr. was a huge fan of the show Star Trek. Each of Anne Frank, Barbara Walters, Martin Luther King Jr. were all born in the same year. More than 1,000 streets are named after Martin Luther King Jr. Martin Luther King Jr. has Irish ancestry through his paternal great-grandfather. King's mother, Alberta Williams King, was also murdered. She was shot while playing organ at church by Marcus Wayne Cheneau, who believed that all Christians are my enemies. Martin Luther King Jr. has used his dream rhetoric in many lesser famous speeches. Martin Luther King Jr. was jailed 29 times. George Washington is the only American other than Martin Luther King Jr. to have his birthday observed as a national holiday. Please don't forget to subscribe and activate the bell to receive everything that's new.